Welcome to Ancient Mysteries. I'm your host, Ben Carter. And in today's episode, we turn our attention to one of the oldest and most enduring legends in human history, a massive vessel built to survive a global flood, said to carry the seeds of life itself. Was Noah's Ark a symbolic tale, or could there have been a real ship behind the story? From sacred texts to archaeological claims, we follow the clues in search of an ancient ship that may have weathered the storm of time. To understand the roots of the Noah's Ark legend, we must begin not with the Bible, but with the ancient cultures that predate it, civilizations whose relationship with the forces of nature shaped their understanding of creation, destruction, and survival. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, was home to some of the earliest recorded flood myths, long before the story of Noah was written down. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians built city-states that flourished through irrigation, agriculture, and trade. But this region was also prone to devastating floods, seasonal, unpredictable, and capable of erasing entire settlements in a matter of days. The constant tension between abundance and annihilation left a deep imprint on the collective psyche of these people. Among the earliest known writings from this region is the Sumerian king list, a text that records kingship being handed down from the heavens and spans both mythical and historical rulers. It speaks of a great flood that interrupted the line of kings, a cataclysm that divides the world into two eras, before and after. Similar themes appear in the Epic of Ziusudra, a story inscribed on ancient tablets around 1700 BCE. In this version, the god Enki warns a man, Ziusudra, of an impending deluge meant to cleanse the earth of corrupt humanity. Enki instructs him to build a massive boat, preserve animals, and survive the flood. The parallels to the biblical story of Noah are striking. Later, during the Babylonian period, the Epic of Gilgamesh emerged as a synthesis of these earlier traditions. In one of its most famous tablets, the hero Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, a man granted immortality by the gods after surviving a global flood in a giant ship. Utnapishtim's account includes divine warning, the gathering of species, and the resting of the ark on a mountain after the waters recede. The similarities to the Genesis account are unmistakable, not just in theme but in structure, language, and even the sequence of events. By the time the Hebrew Bible was written and compiled, beginning in the 6th century BCE, the flood narrative was already ancient. The authors of Genesis likely drew upon these older Mesopotamian traditions, reworking them within the theological and moral framework of their own culture. In the Hebrew version, the flood becomes not just a story of survival, but a divine judgment, and Noah is cast as a righteous man in a corrupt world. The dimensions of the ark are precisely stated, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, and the vessel becomes a sacred container for life, law, and covenant. But beyond Mesopotamia and Israel, flood myths appear in civilizations across the globe. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survived a flood sent by Zeus. In Hindu texts, Manu is warned of a deluge by a divine fish and saves himself by building a boat. Native American, Chinese, and African cultures also preserve stories of great floods that cleanse the earth. While the details vary, the core themes, divine wrath, chosen survivors, preservation of life, remain consistent. These narratives speak to a shared human experience, perhaps born of traumatic memory, or perhaps reflecting a pattern etched into our mythic consciousness. In the ancient world, myths were not simply fiction. They were the vessels through which truth was carried, not factual truth, but existential truth. They encoded history, values, warnings, and sacred meaning. The story of Noah's Ark is not an isolated tale. It is part of a larger flood mythology that suggests either a common cultural memory of a real event or a shared archetype rooted in the human fear of annihilation and the longing for salvation. Whether literal or symbolic, the story's endurance across continents and millennia suggests it touches on something deeply woven into our understanding of what it means to begin again. The mystery at the heart of the Noah's Ark story lies not only in its age or global echoes, but in the possibility that it describes an actual, historical event. According to the book of Genesis, the ark was built by Noah at God's command to escape a worldwide flood sent to purge a corrupted earth. The vessel was constructed from gopher wood, a term still debated by scholars, and sealed with pitch inside and out. It was to carry Noah, his family, and representatives of every living species. The text provides specific measurements, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, translating roughly to 450 feet in length, making it comparable in scale to a modern aircraft carrier. After the flood, it is said to have come to rest on the mountains of Ararat. It is that last phrase, mountains of Ararat, that has focused centuries of investigation. Mount Ararat, located in present-day eastern Turkey near the borders of Armenia and Iran, towers over the landscape at over 16,000 feet and is surrounded by folklore, religious tradition, and local legend. In Armenian Christian tradition, it is the sacred landing site of the Ark. While the Bible refers to mountains in the plural, tradition has long singled out this particular peak. Its remote, glacier-covered slopes and frequent cloud cover have only heightened the sense of enigma. Claims of sightings have persisted for over 1,000 years. As early as the 3rd century CE, Christian Bishop Epiphanius mentioned believers travelling to Ararat in hopes of seeing the Ark. In the 13th century, the explorer Marco Polo wrote of locals who believed remnants of the Ark still existed there. In modern times, expeditions, photographs and testimonies from pilots, climbers and shepherds have all contributed to a growing body of anecdotal evidence. One of the most widely publicized modern claims came in 1917, when Russian aviator Vladimir Roskovitsky reported seeing a massive ship-like structure partially submerged in ice while flying over Mount Ararat. He claimed the Russian government sent an expedition, which documented the site and returned with descriptions of wooden beams, rooms and compartments, but the Bolshevik Revolution soon after allegedly destroyed the records. Similar claims surfaced again in 1949 when a US Air Force photo appeared to show a large, dark formation on the mountain's northwest slope. This became known as the Ararat anomaly. Later in the 1950s and 60s, American explorer George Hagopian claimed to have climbed Ararat with his uncle as a boy in 1908, where they discovered and touched a giant wooden structure emerging from the ice. His story, though never corroborated, remains one of the most detailed eyewitness accounts. Other expeditions, some sanctioned by governments, others undertaken by private researchers and religious groups, have attempted to follow up. Some reported anomalies in satellite imagery. Others claimed to find petrified wood or unusual rock formations. But harsh weather, shifting glacial conditions, and political restrictions have prevented sustained study. In 2010, a Chinese-Turkish expedition from the group Noah's Ark Ministries International announced they had discovered wooden chambers at 13,000 feet on Ararat and presented video footage of interior wooden beams. Though initial excitement was high, the evidence was criticized by scholars and geologists who argued the site was misinterpreted, or worse, fabricated. The team was accused of planting materials or misrepresenting local cave structures as Ark remnants. Once again, the mystery remained unresolved. These repeated claims and dead ends have left the Ark hovering between faith and fact. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the specificity of the Genesis account and the repeated focus on a single mountain range continue to provoke investigation. The mystery is not just whether the Ark existed, but why so many continue to search, risking danger, ridicule, and disappointment. It suggests a deeper yearning, that somewhere beyond the myths and metaphors, a trace of this ancient vessel might still remain, locked in ice, suspended in time, waiting to be found. If the story of Noah's Ark were based on real events, then archaeology should at some point leave behind physical fingerprints, fragments of wood, unusual formations, ancient tool marks, or buried ruins aligning with the Ark's dimensions. Over the last century, a number of such clues have emerged, some intriguing, others controversial, yet none have definitively settled the debate. Still, several discoveries have drawn significant attention from both researchers and skeptics, particularly one found not on Mount Ararat itself, but in its shadow. In 1959, Turkish Army Captain İlhan Durupanar identified a curious boat-shaped formation on a mountainside about 20 miles south of Mount Ararat. The object, visible in aerial photographs, measured approximately 500 feet in length, very close to the biblical dimensions of the Ark when converted to modern units. The site, resting in the rugged terrain near the village of Dowa Bayazit, sparked immediate interest. Though initial surveys suggested it was a natural geological feature, others were not so sure. Over the decades, teams of explorers and researchers visited what came to be known as the Durupinar site. In the 1980s, American explorer Ron Wyatt and Turkish geophysicist Dr. Salih Bayraktutan conducted surface-level studies and ground-penetrating radar scans of the formation. According to their reports, the radar revealed regular internal structures consistent with man-made chambers. They also claimed to have found large, anchor-shaped stones, interpreted as drogue stones used in ancient ships, miles away, but aligned in a pattern as if dropped sequentially from a drifting vessel. Wyatt and his colleagues announced they had found fossilized wood samples and iron spikes embedded in the site, suggesting artificial construction. Some claimed the presence of laminated wood, layers of plank-like material fused together, far too advanced for the era of the supposed flood. They interpreted this as possible evidence of pre-flood engineering knowledge. Additionally, formations resembling rib-like framing were cited as potential hull remains preserved by the unique combination of mineralization and geological pressure. Despite the bold claims, mainstream scientists criticized the findings. Many argued that the supposed wood samples were actually weathered volcanic rock known as dacite, and that the radar data lacked proper peer review. Critics accused Wyatt of confirmation bias and noted that several of his other archaeological claims had been widely discredited. Nonetheless, the Turkish government took the matter seriously enough to declare the site a national park in 1987, naming it the Noah's Ark National Park. Beyond the Durupinar formation, researchers have uncovered other curious elements. In Mesopotamian sites, cuneiform tablets dating back nearly 4,000 years describe flood narratives eerily similar to the Genesis account. The so-called Eridu Genesis and the Atrahasis epic describe gods warning a chosen man of a deluge and instructing him to build a massive boat. One well-preserved tablet even provides measurements for the ark, square in design, constructed in tiers and sealed with pitch. This tablet, discovered in the ruins of ancient Nineveh and translated by British scholar Irving Finkel, offers one of the most complete non-biblical accounts of a flood narrative and has added weight to the possibility that these stories may stem from a shared cultural memory of a catastrophic event. Yet the physical trail remains elusive. Harsh climates, political tensions, and the passage of time have erased much. Glacial movement on Mount Ararat could have crushed or buried any structure long ago. Organic materials would not likely survive the centuries unless perfectly preserved. Still, the very specificity of the dimensions given in Genesis and the repeated motif of a large vessel coming to rest on a mountain after a cataclysm continue to captivate researchers who believe the evidence may not be gone, only hidden. Whether the clues uncovered so far are remnants of the Ark, misidentified natural phenomena, or artifacts of belief, they form a growing archaeological puzzle with pieces that refuse to fit neatly into either myth or history. Conventional scholarship tends to approach the Noah's Ark story through a literary and theological lens, rather than a literal one. Among biblical scholars, the flood narrative is often seen as a mythological account, shaped by oral tradition and infused with symbolic meaning. The Genesis story is considered by many to be a redaction, a composite of multiple earlier sources that were woven together during the Babylonian exile. In this view, the Ark functions less as a historical object and more as a theological device, used to illustrate divine judgment, redemption, and covenant. The most prominent of these scholarly theories is the documentary hypothesis, which suggests the Hebrew Bible was compiled from at least 4 distinct sources, known as J, E, P, and D. Within this framework, the flood narrative in Genesis 6-9 appears to blend 2 overlapping traditions, one where Noah brings 7 pairs of clean animals, and another where he brings only 1 pair of each species. The contradictions, such as the differing durations of the flood, 40 days in one version, 150 in another, are seen as evidence of editorial stitching rather than historical reporting. Scholars argue that these inconsistencies point to a literary construction aimed at conveying theological themes rather than recording a factual event. Geologists and climatologists also question the feasibility of a global flood. A deluge capable of covering every mountain on Earth would require a volume of water far beyond what is present in the planet's hydrological system. Even if all glaciers melted and the atmosphere was saturated with water vapor, it would not be enough to submerge the continents. Moreover, the fossil record and ice core data do not show evidence of a single planet-wide flood occurring within the timescale of human history. Instead, the scientific consensus supports regional flooding events, particularly in the ancient Near East, as far more likely sources of the flood myth. One commonly cited example is the flooding of the Black Sea basin. In 1997, marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed that a sudden breach from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea around 5600 BCE caused catastrophic flooding of what had previously been a freshwater lake. This event, known as the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, could have displaced populations and left a powerful impression on early agrarian societies. Though the theory has its detractors, it remains one of the more plausible natural events that could have inspired ancient flood narratives. Another potential source of the flood myth is the periodic flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers sustained Mesopotamian civilization, but could also wreak havoc when they overflowed. Seasonal inundations might have seemed apocalyptic to early communities, especially if they wiped out settlements and left survivors clinging to rafts or elevated structures. Over generations, these memories could have morphed into a singular flood story, magnified in scope and reinterpreted through the lens of divine retribution. The dimensions and materials of the ark described in Genesis have also come under scrutiny. The term gopher wood appears nowhere else in the Bible and remains unidentified. Some speculate it refers to a now extinct tree or a misunderstood translation. Likewise, the logistics of housing every animal species, feeding them and managing waste over many months defy practicality. Zoologists and engineers alike have noted the implausibility of such a feat with the resources and technologies available in the ancient world. Yet even among skeptical scholars, there is recognition that the flood story occupies a unique space. It is one of the most widely shared mythological themes across human cultures. From the Americas to Asia, indigenous traditions include stories of a great flood that resets civilization. This ubiquity suggests that while the details may be fictionalized or symbolic, the story taps into a collective memory of survival and renewal. It speaks to ancient humanity's confrontation with chaos and the fragile hope of starting over. Whether the ark was real or not, the power of its image continues to shape religious imagination and historical inquiry alike. Despite the widespread agreement among mainstream scholars that the Ark narrative is a theological construction rather than a historical account, the story refuses to rest quietly within the bounds of mythology. A persistent current of dissent, debate and inquiry has continued to challenge these conclusions, some from within the academic world, others from passionate independent researchers, explorers and religious groups. What fuels this continuing interest is not only the tantalizing hints of evidence, but the gaps, contradictions and silences that remain unresolved by conventional explanations. One of the most glaring issues is the specificity and consistency in certain aspects of the narrative. While Genesis offers poetic and symbolic language, the description of the ark's dimensions, its length, width and height, is oddly precise. This level of detail stands out from other mythological tales and raises questions about its origin. Why would a purely symbolic story require a detailed blueprint? And how could such specifications have emerged in such similar form in older Mesopotamian texts like the Atrahasis and Epic of Gilgamesh? If these were only myths, what explains their architectural consistency across cultures and centuries? Another unresolved question lies in the geological record. While scientists dismiss the possibility of a global flood, they often acknowledge that extreme local events, some of massive proportions, did occur. The question then becomes, Could a catastrophic regional flood have been so immense, so devastating to early civilizations that it imprinted itself upon oral traditions as a universal deluge? In this scenario, the myth becomes an echo of something real, exaggerated over time but rooted in an actual traumatic event. Yet no single event has been conclusively identified that matches the flood described in Genesis, or one capable of erasing all life across continents. That absence keeps the debate open. The Durupinar Formation in Turkey remains another point of contention. While mainstream archaeologists largely reject it as a natural formation, others argue that the evidence deserves more rigorous, unbiased scrutiny. The internal radar scans, the metallic readings, and the claimed regular patterns of the formation hint at something anomalous, yet the academic community often avoids involvement, wary of association with fringe ideas. This reluctance, in turn, fuels claims of suppression and selective investigation. Are the anomalies being dismissed too quickly, or have the more sensational conclusions leapt too far ahead of the data? Cultural memory also introduces complex questions. How is it that so many civilizations, separated by oceans, millennia, and language, share core flood motifs? Is this simply a psychological archetype, as some Jungian scholars suggest, or could it reflect the global migration of stories originating from a single traumatic event? If the Ark story is fiction, why has it endured across time and geography with such remarkable consistency? Skeptics also face their own inconsistencies. The assumption that pre-modern people were incapable of recording real events through symbolic narratives may underestimate ancient storytelling. Just as ancient mythologies often preserved astronomical, agricultural, or medical knowledge within allegory, could the story of Noah's Ark encode a real memory, transmitted through myth, because that was the medium available? There are also broader questions about bias. Some scholars accuse mainstream academia of dismissing unconventional findings too quickly, especially when they originate from religiously motivated researchers. Meanwhile, independent investigators are often criticized for confirmation bias and lack of methodological rigor. This polarization has created a vacuum where meaningful, interdisciplinary dialogue is rare. As a result, the Ark remains a subject caught between two extremes, treated either as unquestionable dogma or dismissed entirely as primitive folklore. What lingers in the middle is uncertainty. There is no physical Ark enshrined in a museum. No definitive proof has emerged from Mount Ararat or any other proposed site, and yet the mystery remains unresolved, perhaps not because the evidence is lacking, but because the full story resists easy answers. The contradictions between faith and science, myth and memory, continue to generate not only doubt, but deep fascination. It is within that unresolved space that the legend of Noah's Ark still exerts its power. The legend of Noah's Ark has long captured the imagination of those willing to venture beyond the boundaries of conventional explanation. Among the most provocative voices are those who suggest the story contains echoes of technologies or civilizations lost to history, realities either forgotten by time or deliberately concealed. These theories, though controversial, persist because they offer alternative frameworks for interpreting both the Ark and the flood narrative. While they exist on the fringes of accepted scholarship, they ask questions that remain uncomfortably open. One of the more intriguing suggestions is that the Ark was not a wooden ship at all, but something entirely different, an advanced vessel capable of withstanding not only floods, but forces beyond comprehension. Proponents of this view argue that the massive size of the Ark, its durability, and its capacity to sustain life in extreme conditions point to knowledge far beyond Bronze Age shipbuilding. Some theorists have drawn comparisons to submersible vessels or even spacecraft, arguing that the description of the Ark rising above the mountains could be interpreted as metaphoric language for something that took to the skies or beyond. In this vein, ancient alien theorists propose that Noah, or the figure upon whom the character is based, was selected by extraterrestrials to survive a global reset. According to these theories, the flood may have been a targeted event, perhaps even engineered, to erase a corrupted civilization while preserving genetic stock through a kind of cosmic biosphere. The Ark, then, would be a technological craft rather than a boat, preserving DNA samples rather than live animals. While speculative, this view attempts to explain how a single vessel could carry all species, a logistical impossibility under normal conditions. Linked to this idea is the theory of ancient genetic engineering. Some suggest that the phrase, two of every kind, may not refer to literal animals, but to preserve genetic information, implying that the Ark was more of a seed vault or gene bank, similar in concept to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault today. This interpretation posits a level of biological knowledge that predates modern science and hints at lost capabilities now dismissed as myth. Others approach the Ark through the lens of symbolic encoding. According to certain esoteric traditions, the Ark is not just a vessel, but a metaphor for a spiritual or metaphysical process, an alchemical journey representing purification and transformation. In these interpretations, the flood is not a literal deluge, but a symbolic cleansing of consciousness. The animals represent different aspects of the psyche or elements of creation, and Noah's role is that of a spiritual guide navigating the chaos of human nature toward renewal. Still more radical theories suggest that the Ark was an artifact of a lost civilization, perhaps one connected to Atlantis, Lemuria, or other supposed antediluvian cultures. If a great flood did occur as a result of comet impact, pole shift, or sudden sea level rise, it could have wiped out advanced societies, leaving behind only fragments of their knowledge encoded in myth. In this context, the Ark becomes a surviving piece of a forgotten world, a lone outpost of continuity between pre-cataclysmic and post-cataclysmic humanity. These fringe theories often lack empirical support and are rightly met with skepticism. But their endurance points to something deeper, a human instinct to reinterpret myth when traditional answers feel incomplete. In a story as ancient and universal as Noah's Ark, it becomes difficult to separate historical memory from imaginative reconstruction. Theories of advanced vessels, DNA preservation, or extraterrestrial intervention all stem from a common impulse: to understand how such a complex story could have emerged so early, with such power and with such technical specificity. Whether these ideas reflect lost truths or are simply projections of modern fears and fascinations, they speak to the Ark's continuing resonance. It is more than a relic of religious storytelling. It is a vessel for our questions, our doubts, and our most expansive possibilities. Within its frame, be it wood, metal, or metaphor, exists a blueprint not just for survival, but for the mystery of human origins itself. The story of Noah's Ark, whether viewed through a religious, historical, or mythological lens, is not simply a tale of divine wrath or ancient survival. It is a profound cultural symbol, deeply embedded in the fabric of human civilization. Across continents and epochs, its core themes, catastrophe, salvation, moral reckoning, and renewal, have echoed through countless cultures, suggesting that its resonance is not confined to the Hebrew Bible, but is instead part of a much older, more universal narrative. In Mesopotamian tradition, the flood myth predates the Genesis account by centuries. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which features Utnapishtim as a proto-Noah figure, shares strikingly similar elements: divine warning, the construction of a massive boat, the preservation of life, and a bird sent out to find dry land. These recurring motifs suggest a shared symbolic language among early civilizations, one in which water becomes the ultimate purifier and the Ark the vessel of continuity. Water, in nearly every mythological tradition, represents chaos and rebirth. From the primordial waters of Egyptian cosmogony to the cleansing waters of Hindu cycles of destruction and renewal, floods are rarely just disasters. They are thresholds, gateways between epochs, separating corrupted pasts from hopeful futures. The Ark, then, becomes more than a vehicle. It becomes the axis of human transformation. It is both womb and tomb, preserving what must endure and burying what must be forgotten. Even in cultures with no direct contact with the ancient Near East, similar flood stories emerge. In the traditions of the Hopi, a great flood cleanses the earth of those who turned away from spiritual paths. In Hindu texts, Manu is warned by the god Vishnu of a coming flood and builds a boat to carry seeds of all life. In Chinese mythology, figures like Yu the Great are credited with taming the floodwaters to preserve civilization. These cultural parallels, too broad and detailed to dismiss as coincidence, imply either a shared ancestral memory or a common psychological archetype, what Carl Jung termed the collective unconscious. Religious interpretations, especially within Judaism, Christianity and Islam, assign profound theological meaning to the Ark story. For Jews, it is part of the Torah's moral arc, emphasizing covenant and obedience. For Christians, it foreshadows themes of salvation and judgment, with Noah often seen as a Christ-like figure delivering humanity from doom. In Islam, the Quran names Nuh and recounts his mission to warn his people, building an ark that ultimately saves the faithful. In each case, the story transcends literalism to deliver moral and metaphysical truths about faith, justice, and the fragility of existence. The Ark has also been reimagined in art, literature, and architecture. Medieval cathedrals echoed its form, with the nave, a term derived from the Latin navis or ship, symbolizing a sacred refuge from worldly storms. In literature, from Dante to Milton, the flood becomes a metaphor for divine purification. And in modern culture, the Ark continues to appear in novels, films, and symbolic structures like the Ark encounter in Kentucky, a full-scale replica intended to inspire belief and provoke debate. Psychologically, the story taps into deep fears and hopes. It speaks to the terror of annihilation, the guilt of human failing, and the yearning for redemption. It reminds us that civilization is always one disaster away from collapse, and that survival, if it comes, will depend not on strength alone, but on wisdom, preparation, and humility. The Ark is not just a relic of ancient theology, it is an enduring metaphor for human continuity in the face of chaos. In this light, the search for Noah's Ark is more than a quest for wood and nails. It is a search for meaning. What is preserved in a flood tells us what a culture values most. Whether literal or symbolic, divine or natural, the Ark becomes a vessel for human memory, fear, and hope. It is the story we tell ourselves when the world falls apart, and the promise we cling to as we seek to build it again. As the centuries have passed and countless interpretations of the Ark have emerged, the core elements of the story, its timeline, geography, purpose and aftermath, have remained the subject of intense scrutiny and endless fascination. Summarizing the key threads of evidence, debate and speculation reveals not only the complexity of the mystery, but the profound human need to understand it. From ancient texts and archaeological claims to scientific theories and symbolic frameworks, the Ark of Noah remains one of the most deeply explored enigmas of ancient history. The earliest written flood narratives, such as those found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Sumerian King List, provide some of the strongest circumstantial support for the idea that a great flood may have truly occurred. These texts, dating back to nearly 2000 BCE or earlier, mirror the Genesis account in ways that are difficult to ignore. Each describes a man chosen to preserve life, a vessel of extraordinary size, and a cataclysmic event intended to reset the world. The thematic overlap suggests a shared cultural memory, whether from a real flood or a universally resonant myth. Geological evidence for massive regional floods, particularly in Mesopotamia and around the Black Sea, continues to fuel debate. The Black Sea deluge hypothesis, though contested, stands as one of the more scientifically grounded theories that could explain how a devastating regional event may have been remembered and mythologized as a global catastrophe. Likewise, sedimentary layers in ancient cities like Ur and Shuruppak show signs of significant flood events that would have disrupted early civilizations and perhaps inspired foundational myths. The Darupanar site in Turkey remains one of the most discussed modern claims related to the Ark's potential resting place. Though most archaeologists classify the formation as a natural geologic structure, others point to anomalies in the site's layout, soil composition, and internal scans that suggest something artificial may lie beneath. These findings, alongside eyewitness reports of wooden beams, iron rivets, and compartmental structures, continue to attract researchers despite official academic reluctance to investigate further. Mainstream scholars, focusing on textual analysis, maintain that the story's primary function is theological. The Ark narrative, they argue, is part of a larger biblical tradition of covenant and judgment. It carries spiritual truths more than historical ones, and should be read symbolically rather than literally. Yet, This approach doesn't fully account for the deep, near-universal consistency of flood stories across cultures, nor the persistence of localized traditions, like those in Armenia and eastern Turkey, that claim knowledge of the Ark's location, passed down through generations. Fringe theories introduce a range of speculative possibilities, from ancient technologies and extraterrestrial intervention to hidden DNA banks and lost pre-flood civilizations. Though lacking empirical support, these ideas tap into the larger question of whether humanity's distant past may have included knowledge, tools, or events that our current models do not accommodate. Even among skeptics, the symbolic richness of these narratives is hard to dismiss. The Ark becomes a stand-in for survival technology, cultural preservation, or a lost epoch of forgotten wisdom. What emerges from all of this is not a clear answer, but a powerful narrative tension between belief and doubt, evidence and absence, myth and memory. The Ark represents a boundary between eras, between worlds, between faith and reason. It raises difficult questions. Can a myth be rooted in fact? Can an object of legend still lie waiting to be found? And perhaps most hauntingly, if we did uncover it, would it confirm our deepest beliefs or challenge them? This enduring enigma persists not because it has been solved, but because it refuses to be forgotten. It is a story that invites endless interpretation and resists simple classification. Whether viewed through the lens of archaeology, theology, geology, or folklore, the Ark of Noah continues to provoke curiosity, debate, and wonder. As long as there are questions about humanity's origins, survival, and destiny, the mystery of the Ark will remain afloat, anchored not just in scripture, but in the deepest recesses of human consciousness. Beneath the surface of the Ark story lies a question far more profound than whether a wooden vessel once rested atop a mountain. The enduring allure of Noah's Ark isn't only about proof, it's about meaning. The flood narrative is not merely a tale of destruction, it is a blueprint for renewal, a metaphor for survival, and a vessel for humanity's oldest fears and highest hopes. Its power lies in its ability to transcend time, culture, and belief systems, speaking to something deeply embedded in the human condition. The Ark symbolizes the thin line between chaos and order, extinction and continuity. In a world increasingly aware of its own fragility, rising sea levels, environmental collapse, social upheaval, the image of a ship designed to preserve the essence of life remains hauntingly relevant. It reminds us of what we value, what we hope to save, and what might be lost if we fail to act wisely. This isn't just a story about the ancient past. It is a reflection of our present and a warning for our future. For those who view the Ark as a literal historical artifact, its discovery would be seismic, a validation not only of scripture but of a worldview that holds ancient texts as historical documents. If such a vessel were ever found and verified, it could reframe entire disciplines, disrupt religious and scientific paradigms, and rewrite what we believe about human history. For many, the hope of such a find keeps the search alive, on mountainsides, in ancient texts, in the fossil record, and deep within the psyche. But even if no timber is ever unearthed, the Ark's influence is undiminished. Its presence in art, literature, theology, and popular imagination underscores its symbolic potency. It teaches that survival is possible, that foresight matters, that renewal is part of the cycle. In that way, it fulfills its function, not as an artifact, but as a myth, one that carries the weight of collective memory and aspiration. The ambiguity surrounding the Ark is perhaps what gives it life. If the vessel were definitively proven to exist or proven not to, it might lose its mythic resonance. The tension between the real and the imagined is what keeps it afloat in the minds of believers, skeptics, and scholars alike. In every flood story, there is a deeper message, not just about water and judgment, but about resilience and rebirth. The Ark of Noah, then, is not just a ship. It is a mirror. It reflects back our questions, our longings, and our beliefs about what it means to endure. In seeking the Ark, we're ultimately seeking ourselves, our past, our origins, and perhaps even a sense of destiny. Whether resting beneath the snow of Ararat, buried in layers of legend, or hidden in plain sight through metaphor, its story continues to sail through time, unsinkable, unstoppable, and forever mysterious. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Ancient Mysteries. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to Ancient Mysteries on Spotify. Subscribe now.